Welcome to the worst financial mistakes in the Bible and how you can avoid them. In this session, we're going to cover chapter 3, embezzling God's property. Now, let me read you the definition of embezzlement. Embezzlement is the fraudulent conversion of another's property by a person who is in a position of trust, such as an agent or employee. Most nations treat embezzlement as a serious crime, punishable by significant penalties in both civil and criminal courts. Now, the person that I've pointed out who's made this mistake is Achan. This is called Achan's sin, and it's taken from Joshua chapter 7. Now, before you tune out, most of you probably think you've never done this. You wouldn't even consider such an outrageous thing. I would have said the same thing, but I want you to pay close attention. If you remember the story, the Israelite army had just had a great victory, and they took the spoils or the plunder, and they were supposed to destroy it. But Achan said, I think I want some of that. So he took it and hid it himself. Now, this was what he had originally done. He took property that belonged to God. But let me tell you the rest of the story. This was offensive to the Lord himself. In fact, the Bible says that the Lord said, "Who has done such an outrageous thing?" Can you imagine stealing somebody else's property, like from your friend or your neighbor or a member of your family? Achan was so calloused in his heart that he stole God's property. And in the rest of the story, a member from each of the tribes of the 12 tribes of Israel, a representative, is called forward to be examined. And Achan is one of them. Can you imagine standing there, knowing they somehow have mysteriously picked you as the possible perpetrator of this crime? So Achan has the pressure upon him. And when the pressure finally, when he realizes he's probably going to get caught, I want you to listen to what Achan said. Achan replied, "It is true, I have sinned against the Lord, the God of Israel. And this is what I have done. When I saw in the plunder a beautiful robe from Babylonia, 200 shekels of silver and a bar of gold, weighing 50 shekels, I coveted them and took them. And they're hidden in the ground inside my tent with the silver underneath." Now listen to what happened to him. First he saw something that he wanted. Then he coveted. And then he took it. And then he hid it. That's the journey to embezzlement. Now what does this have to do with you and me? But it was my friend Dr. John Piper who coined this term, that we're all embezzling what belongs to God. You see in Psalm 24:1 it says, "The earth is the Lord's, and everything in it, and all who dwell therein." Let me say that again. The earth is the Lord's, and everything in it. So anything that we claim as our own, we're actually embezzling it from God. It belongs to God. God is the owner of all things, and He owns you and me. And He owns everything that we can see or feel or touch, or even a little printed piece of paper that we can fold and put in our wallet and call our own. So if we say that it's our own, we're just like Achan. We're taking what God has provided for us, all the good gifts He's given us that come from Him, and saying, it comes from my power and my strength and my ability, and I'm going to own it and I'm going to control it. Now, what are the consequences of this terrible sin? Do you know what happened to Achan? In the valley of Achor, Achan was actually stoned to death, and the rocks were piled on top of him as a memorial that God is serious about this idea of embezzling His property. Now, none of us think that we're going to go into the church and take money out of the offering plate. And we're not going to actually commit this sin. But do you know where we commit this sin? We commit it in the privacy of our own heart. And that's where the mistake comes. That's where we get trapped. We see it, we desire it, we take it, and then we hide it. But God knows. That's why I wanted to point this mistake out, because I've done it. I've made those decisions that I see something that I feel is essential to my life, and I'm going to get it. And I'm going to believe that even if I take it and claim it as mine, knowing fully that it's God or something God provided that belongs to Him, I want to hide it from the Lord. But I want you to see, whenever this happens, it's always discovered. God knows what's in our heart. That's why He's weighing our motives. You see, it was trivial, probably, these things that Achan took, the bars of gold and silver. God didn't need those things. What He needed was a faithful and true follower who would not take for his own what was rightfully God's. So what is the solution? How do you avoid the trap of embezzlement? Well, you avoid the trap of embezzlement by recognizing that everything belongs to God. Do you remember how David described it? David described it in 1 Chronicles 29, 11, and 12, when he said, "Everything in the heavens and earth is yours, O Lord, and this is your kingdom. We adore you as being in control of everything. Riches and honor come from you alone, and you're the ruler of all mankind. Your hand controls power and might, and it is at your discretion that men are made great and given strength." David said, I'm not embezzling God's property. I'm acknowledging Him as the owner. God owns everything, and He owns you and me. So to avoid embezzling God's property, remember that God owns everything, and that we're not to claim it as our own. This will set you free from this desire that Achan had to go and take things and to try to hide it from God.